one of the things you mentioned when you talk, it'll segue nice. I'm going to go to Dr. Johnson. I'll come to you after that, Wayne. Is when you talk about the impact on the Black community, there's a movement in this country right now towards diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, right, all across the board, and it becomes apparently clear that if a company automatically excludes people with a criminal record, by sheer numbers, you're excluding Black and Hispanic candidates.
Yeah, let me put a number on it because
please,
that's what I do. 1 in 3 Black men in America has a felony conviction.
So that's a third.
How can we ever get to a place of equality of opportunity across racial lines unless we offer pathways to employment?
Yeah, and there's a paper out there, I think it's called The Invisible Job Seeker, that hits on this very issue from 2013. Even back then, people realized that we had already fallen off the cliff, but what are we going to do to fix it? So, Richard, if you'd give us some comments, your perspective on this issue and your work here at TPPF, would be really, really helpful.
Absolutely, and John, I'll start with invoking a few words from a few good friends of mine. Martin Luther King said that the time is always right to do right. So you don't have a certain particular time. This is the moment to do right. And Frederick Douglass also said that he would unite with anyone to do the right thing, but no one to do the wrong thing. And so we need to unite together, bring the public and private sectors together, because you can't do it without bringing the businesses on board. And the businesses have to unite with the criminal justice system and institutions to be able to create a bridge that would actually bridge men and women from incarceration into gainful employment, and then also wrap around services to make sure that employment is sustainable. And my good friend, Booker T. Washington said it best. He said, nothing ever comes to one that's worth having without hard work. Nothing at all. So when men and women are gainfully employed and have the ability to work in the industry and demonstrate dignity and pride, you have then reintegrated them into society. Now the challenge becomes, how do we get employment on board? How do we get community leaders on board? And how do we get the political politicians on board? Because we can have the greatest programs in the world, and we can have the greatest initiatives in the world, because we do. We have that in Texas, we have that in the United States of America, but when the political will comes into play, then that basically is where the change happens. And the reason why we're having this discussion right now, because it's more of a top-down discussion, because the current political will is to move forward reentry across America. And I'm grateful for it. Being an African-American man, I'm grateful for it. And I've been working in the criminal justice system for over 2 decades, as you mentioned in my introduction, with the Louisiana Prison Chapel Foundation, where the Chapel Foundation raised the resources to build churches inside of prisons throughout the state of Louisiana. And that was our contribution to criminal justice reform, because we know that God changes the hearts of men. But my good friend, who is now the Secretary of Public Safety in Louisiana, Jimmy LeBlanc, who served on the board with me, Jimmy was always concerned about programs. We had certain folks on the board who were concerned about building the churches to deal with the spiritual side of man. But Jimmy was always concerned about programs and being able to bring forward those workforce development programs and tie them in the industry so that we could create that bridge across into healthy living. And as Pastor Lowry mentioned earlier, when he talked about the family is a crucial point for any society, not just Black families or Black communities, but any community. And so when we're able to keep the family intact and make it healthy, then you have strong and healthy communities, and you have a strong and healthy state, strong and healthy America. Now, what we're going to have to do, we do have some deficits. You know, as Jeff mentioned, we got 19 million people, what we call on paper, you know, that are felons. 19 million people is a lot of people. And so what we have to do is create another perception out there, removing the stigma of second chance opportunities, because America is a second, third, fourth chance country. And if you don't believe me, try it. Go broke. You can go back and make some more money.
I've done it. I appreciate it. I'm living proof.
I have friends who say I've been a millionaire 3 times. I mean, so America is a second, third, fourth chance country. And that's the beauty of America, you know, is that a man and a woman can go out and work and by the sweat of their brow, be able to stand up as a decent human being and raise a family to be productive in this country. And that's all that men and women want to do who are incarcerated. You know, again, I spent over 20 years of working inside of prisons, building churches inside of prisons. And so I worked intimately close with inmates who are many of them are my best friends right now. I mean, and they're carrying on ministry in other areas. But the thing is, all they want to do is go to work and be productive. You know, some individuals make one mistake, and that one mistake, you know, carries throughout their lifetime. And say, hey man, I made a mistake. I've paid my debt to society. I want to go back and be a normal human being. And so I think that once we take a look at what Frederick said, I will unite with anyone to do the right thing and no one to do the wrong thing. Is it right for us to leave human capital on the table? Because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about those institutions. Those are banks of human capital, and the most probably I would say the most powerful resource we have on the planet. I know some people will say, you know, minerals and oil and certain other things, you know, but the most powerful resource we have on the planet is human resource. And I was talking with a good friend of mine the other day, and he said that, you know, he said the cavemen had the same resources that we have. The only difference is man has evolved. And so the human resource makes the difference on the planet. And every company has, you know, especially your bigger companies will have a human resource department. And they're looking for those human resources. So what I would say is take a look at what my good friend Booker T. Washington said. He said, cash your bucket where you are. I would say to the businessman and woman in industry, cash your bucket where you are. To the politicians, cast your bucket where you are. To the community leaders, cast your bucket where you are, because it's fresh water, and we'll be able then to bring all of humanity up by working together, uniting together, casting our buckets where we are. We live in Texas and Louisiana, Gulf Coast states. We're on the Gulf Coast. This is oil and gas country. This is energy country. So I say to the energy industry, cash your bucket where you are. We have a lot of resources that are coming out of criminal justice system, and there'll be a benefit to industry, and industry will be a benefit to them. And then Texas will raise up even higher, because we're on the move, even higher than where we are in the United States of America. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. I want to stick with you for 1 second. You know, you touched on the need for public and private partnerships, right? And obviously you've done work on both sides of that. What should those look like, right? Or what are some elements of some successful public and private partnerships that can lead to positive second chance hiring outcomes?
The greatest opportunity is for industry to adopt programs that are inside of prisons, you know, reentry programs that are inside of prisons. and become a partner with those particular programs. And actually, because there's a lot of industry, the value and the talent that's inside of the criminal justice system is incredible once you go inside the walls and take a look at it. And most of those individuals, over 75% of the individuals that are there for nonviolent offenses. So these are people who probably were trying to create their own economic system outside in the streets, and then basically it landed them into incarceration. So if what it looks like is, if I, Richard Johnson Industry, partnered with John Reentry program in this particular facility to train workers in his facility to basically do jobs in Richard Johnson Industry.
Okay.
And then once we train individuals to be able to fill the void that we have out here in the workforce community, then those individuals, when they come out, they go right into those jobs. And of course, they're a part of the infrastructure is already wraparound services for housing and other social service resources. But the main thing is to be able to know, hey, I got a meaningful life waiting for me on the other end of this deal. And I'm not trapped into a place where we have, 1 million out of 2 million people released, 1 million goes a year and a half without getting a job. And that leaves too much of a gap, too much of an opportunity for the old employer, the streets, to come in and help them meet personal needs, because many of the men and women that are coming out have children, they have families, they have responsibilities, and they have to meet those obligations. And so that's probably the forefront thing on their minds.
How do we incentivize these different actors, right? It sounds like there's a lot of needles to thread here, right? There's the government needle, there would be the private industry needle, right? The prison itself. How do we incentivize the different stakeholders to participate in this? Where are the incentives and the leverage points?
I think the biggest player that we need to probably make aware of incentives, like tax credit incentives for industry partners is going to be industry partners, because it's just like when you drill in the ground for oil, the oil is already there, so when you go into the incarcerated environment, the human capital is already there, it's ready to come out. Now how we then bring in a process that would basically transform that human capital into being productive human capital on the outside, is where we need the incentives to do that. Because unless private industry really wants to do it, there aren't any incentives unless you bring in incentives like that are capitalized incentives, with your tax credits, and those are good examples.
Can I jump in?
Please.
There's nothing like a red hot labor market to drive this change. I mean, 2018, 2019, we were making tremendous progress. And the Fed has recently adopted a new policy framework. And in his press conference, Fed Chair Powell talked about how getting back to full employment and keeping the economy at that high level of employment, even though it risks a little bit higher levels of inflation, solves a lot of social ills. And I think that's the best incentive of all, is let the free enterprise system work through this.
That's it. That flies here at TPPF, I can tell you that. Right?
The free market.
That's right. So Wayne, thanks for being so patient, waiting for Jeff and Richard to crystallize the sort of the problem and some of the solutions for us. From your perspective at the Railroad Commission, where do you see the opportunities in this space, and how do you think the best way to leverage it is? And you tell us a little bit about how you got into it.
Yeah, the thing that I think is amazing, I think many people don't understand exactly what God's given us as far as minerals in the state of Texas. You mentioned that, everybody knows Texas is big oil and gas, but back in 2016, the estimated from Alaska through Brownsville that we had of resources of oil, just oil, was 34 billion barrels, which that was about 50 years worth of oil according to the current measurements then. As of 2017, we discovered oil in West Texas. The latter part of 2016, 2017, the estimate was that we had about 20 billion barrels they discovered out there in West Texas. It then, as they started digging through the shales, found out it went to 40, went to 60. I think it's around 90 confirmed billion barrels that they have out there confirmed. And I was sitting with some engineers and others in a couple places, and they started saying the estimated, and this is estimated, amount of oil reserves in West Texas is basically around 230 billion barrels. You've got to understand, and it's trillions of cubic tons of natural gas, equivalent. So here God has given us, now where it was 40, 50 years of reserves, we now have half a century of reserves. The United States went from being a net importer to a net exporter. The United States is now the #1 producer of oil and gas on planet Earth prior to the downturn. And Texas, were it a country, we would be #4 in the world in production of oil and natural gas. So comes that, what's the hindrance to that occurring? Well, there's about 3 different directions here, but mostly it's political, and you've got economic, and you've got basically educational. We need currently, before the downturn, it was estimated, I went to IOGCC, which is 31 states that produce oil and gas, in Canada and the United States. And the biggest problem there was we didn't have enough employees nationwide, North Dakota and all. Came back to Texas, and at the Railroad Commission, they say, well, each commissioner has a little side project on his own he kind of takes. So I said, okay, I'll take employment. We created a jobs task force, and the estimates we had at that time were that we were 40,000 laborers in the state of Texas short of what we needed currently in oil and gas. Now, that's not even adding 230 billion barrels and trillions of cubic feet of natural gas to this. This is that. At that time, we had 4 liquefied natural gas export stations under construction along the coast of Texas. We had 2 refineries under construction, plastics plants, and the largest number of pipelines under construction in the history of the nation. These haven't gone away, okay? And they're talking about doubling the size of the Port of Houston, okay? So all this is under there. Then we have the downturn. And I'm thinking, okay, we went from 40 million needed employees in just the state of Texas. That has to be a downturn now since we've lowered production and we've had this crash. No, it increased the need projections because you had a lot of people that are tired of the cyclical industry that are retiring from the industry. You have a lot of people that are eligible for retirement, that are taking retirement during this downturn. So the current estimate just in the state of Texas is now over 50 million workers we need in the oil and gas industry in the state of Texas. I just read an article from the Houston Chronicle this morning that said nationwide, the current estimate is about 107,000 in the nation needed workers. So here are the jobs available. Now, what are the hindrances to those? Well, really, a lot of it is the perception that oil and gas is something evil and terrible, okay? And I was just joking this morning, but I basically say my generation of baby boomers has produced some Vietnam draft dodging tenured professors that have taught about 2 generations of our kids.
Tell us what you really think.
Well, I mean, that's fact. I'm sorry. You should tell that there's something wrong with America. There's something wrong with oil and gas. There's something wrong with the free market system, all this type of things. And so the biggest, going to IOGCC, which I mentioned that, the #1 cause of not having enough labor was the fact that children and people believe it's not a industry that's going to have any future to it. It's kind of immoral, that it's serving to tear up the world, and all these premises that they live by. Plus, parents nationwide are insulted in junior high or high school if you insinuate their child might think of community college or technical skills program. Interesting thing, I came back home after that, and I was told, said, well, Wayne, in East Texas here, we have a little community college that has graduated in a small town, less than 4,000 people, graduated about 2,000 young men and women the last 10 years. They start at 5-figure incomes in oil and gas, and they weren't able to grow in the industry because they didn't have their 4-year diplomas. They can move in the executive ranks. So they made a contract with the local 4-year college, with the little 2-year college, and said they then online could take 100% of the hours from the 2-year college in oil and gas and online take the remaining 2 years and you create a 4-year diploma earning potentially 6-figure income with no debt. And immediately I mentioned that on Fox News channel, and immediately Fox News headline is Texas Energy experimenting with 4-year diploma with potential 6-figure income and no debt. I start getting calls. And so since that time, we've tried to expand that, our committee, our employment committee, and are proud to say we've got a campus donated right now. We're trying to work with it. But anyhow, the amount of labor is unbelievably, and it's increasing. I understand in the state of Texas, it's 1 out of every 10 jobs. It's 1/3 of our economy. And it's all the rainy day fund. It's $51 returned to the state government for every dollar invested in the industry, all oil and gas. I was with Ambassador Friedman in Israel back when we were having the moving of the Jerusalem, the capital. And he said, Commissioner, what we've accomplished here in the Mideast is the discovery of oil in West Texas has made all the difference in the world. He said, in fact, we have a conference call monthly with all the ambassadors worldwide. And it has absolutely changed worldwide the position of the United States, because we not only have, and people don't understand this, we not only have economic security through this discovery of oil and gas the good Lord's given us. We not only have economic, but we have energy security. But more importantly, thank our veterans and ones that have served us, we now have national security. We no longer have to send our best and brightest overseas to risk their lives for access to the Persian Gulf. And this is something I think that just has not digested the American people. Second thing that fights us is not just the perception of oil and gas, but it's that our investment community. Right now, there's these funds called ESG, and because of the false, I say, incomplete understanding of environmental truths, that we've created this finance system out of New York and major banks that are called ESG funds, which means anything except fossil fuel. And so people are starting, because of what they've been taught from my college friends, okay, what they've been told by the media, what they've been heard from politics, that it's incomplete truth. They are not no longer financing, and they say, you put your money here, we won't go into oil and gas or anything. So the money's going away from there, and banks are being pulled. And the Rockefeller family, for one, you understand, Johnny Rockefeller, one that founded basically oil and gas in America and made their fortune. They're now fighting the family as hard as possible, using everything they have at their disposal, the Rockefellers, to stop all financing of oil and gas. Now, we're in a downturn. What's it going to take for us to come back out of this? It's going to take financing to get the dollars for this to happen in Texas, which it will, I believe. But you're cutting the throat of the finance department to not be able to send dollars to much needed companies. You have international, major multinational corporations in oil and gas that have already, 2 I know of international major oil and gas companies that have said, we're going to agree to the new Green Deal. By 2050, we're going to be carbon free. We're not going to be producing oil and gas, et cetera, like that. Okay. So it's like before we even fight a fight, we've surrendered. And so I think the industry has to understand we have got to continue to work and support oil and gas in Texas and its gift. And we can go into the debate on the environment, but the fact is the other case, third, that they use against is the environmental premise that oil and gas is something terrible to the world. And you start looking at some of the balanced facts, there's for and against us. And frankly, you've got oil and gas, the past decade, since 1970, this is EPA fact, since 1970, as far as environmental, we have, to 1970 today, we have decreased every poisonous gas identified by the EPA that's harming the environment. We've decreased that by 70%. And also during the last, they don't like you to say, the last 3 years, we've been decreased it down another 7%. So we, and even at the panel of on environmentalism they did at a political nationwide town hall, everybody agreed the United States is not the problem. We're 15% of the world's environmental situation. But why we would join something like the Paris Accord, which is a hot political topic, that we're going to rejoin that or not. Paris Accord says we're going to spend $78 trillion and destroy opportunity all over this world because we want to perhaps decrease the temperature potentially 1.5 degrees over the next 50 years. Okay, we increased the temperature of our planet by historical perspective 1 degree the last 100 years. Okay. You can't get an airplane going anywhere without getting a projection of what the weather has changed to. So what do we need to do since it came down 1 degree over the last 100 years and it goes up another 1.5 degrees? How about building a better air conditioner? That might help, or better heaters. So there's all kinds of argument to go against what we need to do as far as a society. And this is what we're facing. We are going to need to make a decision. Last point I'll make. The governor of Arkansas, of Alaska, the governor of Alaska a year ago for the Energy Council at their convention got up and said, we have environmental problems, we have all these type problems that we're looking at, but there is only one real problem we don't have an answer to in oil and gas in our energy force, and that's political. And I'm all for Donald Trump and James Campos in this election. Sorry, I'm being political. But there is this view that you're going to go to the Green New Deal, which shuts down the God-given gift to this country and nation that's given us energy security, national security, and economic security, or not. And right now, with my 30 seconds left, let me just give you another stat. You know, I love seeing electric cars are great. We have a great electric car factory put in Austin, Texas. That's super. Right now, 9% of our entire grid in America is by wind and solar. Okay, we're going to shut down coal, oil, and gas. That means we're going to have only 9% of the current electricity in our nation available. And the article just this morning said that we were looking at unbelievable shortages across this nation in all kinds of realms. And so anyhow, there's a fight here. The election will say whether we get the greatest friend, I think, to jobs is James Campos. I've seen at the national level of any person. And frankly, I just want to keep him in office. I have a political view.
So, John, could I say this is very different from the second chance panels I do in California?
Welcome to Texas. Welcome to Texas, Jeff.
Hey, John, I just want to say, you know, Wayne, 50 million jobs. I mean, you know, we got a lot of folks. We can go right back to my old neighborhood.
That's 50,000. 50,000
well, 50,000 jobs. We can go right back to my own neighborhood.
107 nationwide.
You see,
1,000.
that's why I say if we cast our buckets where we are, we're here in Texas. If we cast our buckets right here in Texas, we can take care of a lot of the unemployment in my old neighborhood. We can take care of a lot of folks who are incarcerated coming out, put families back together. And I think that'll also respond to your political situation.
So Jeff, let me jump to you on this. So what are some of the objections and concerns, right, that you see with employers hiring people with criminal records? Because I want to kick it back then to Wayne and to Richard after that, sort of talk about how we get past that and how we build something out of this panel.
Sure, there are three. One is liability/safety. And that is something where I think the Texas Public Policy Foundation's work in reducing liability has been really critical, and one of the reasons that Texas is doing such a great job in this area. Safety is something you can manage through by your selection process, right? You essentially, when you partner with nonprofits or a prison system to say who's ready for employment and to rebuild their lives, they can tell you who's going to be the low safety. You have a risk with any employee, whether they came from prison or have a criminal record or not. The second concern is quality of work. And that is, again, something that if you follow the right model, you get not just an employee, you get an exceptionally good employee, because people who have come from a background with a criminal record, have been burdened with that record, appreciate the opportunity and are so engaged. And the final one is reputation. And that is something often entwined with quality concerns. I'll tell you, there's a wonderful for-profit bakery restaurant in Lexington, Kentucky, the DV8 Kitchen. And they do second chance hiring. Halfway houses are their staffing agency, effectively. And Rob Perez, the founder, said we had great difficulty attracting people. And I said, were they afraid? Was it physical safety concern? And he said, no, they thought the quality would be bad. They thought second chance meant second rate. And it was only once this cafe kept getting 5-star Yelp reviews, and now it's one of the actually top reviewed restaurants of its type in the country, did people realize second chance doesn't mean second rate. So all of these, so then you have that reputation piece. It's not just for quality, it's how will people perceive us. And this is something where I think we have a very healthy sea change in the United States, where people understand that if you are providing second chances, you're giving back to the community and you're doing a service as well. And people are starting to shop, not in spite of second chance employment, but because of it. Driving here to the, yesterday, driving to the airport in Boston, where I started from, past a big billboard for Dave's Killer Bread. And they wear on their sleeve that they are a second chance employer, and it helps their sales. So I think that reputation risk is way overblown as a risk. It is actually an opportunity for employers.
Great. And Richard, one thing that of the three items Jeff mentioned, one of the other barriers that I've seen, it's probably folded in here, maybe into the quality of work issue, is, the soft skills training, right? There's hard and soft skills required for folks. I can tell you from when I was representing, organized crime folks all the way up until I was locked up with them, right? Yeah. Not all of these, had the level of decorum of Mr. Christian here, right? So, right? Not all of them with that level of gentleman. See, I sneak in a political joke. So Richard, how do we get people to that point, right? Because we have to hard skill folks to be able to do the jobs, when we'll talk to Wayne in a second about the types of skills that are required. But then those soft skills, how do we get people to that who may have never been taught soft skills?
One of the things I want to do right before I go into that, I want to talk about, creating an effective first chance in a lot of our communities that would eliminate the need for a second chance. We have to approach this from a prevention, criminal justice from a prevention perspective and an intervention perspective simultaneously, which is, slowing down what's coming into the pipeline, until we cut the pipeline off, and then dealing with what's already in the institutions. Career technology education, if you go back to the 1963 Vocational Education Act, where, at that time, the political will was to make sure that students in high school were trained in a marketable skill where they could actually, graduate out of high school and then go right into industry. And those students who wanted to go into higher ed could go into higher ed. But then we got this perception, I think Wayne touched on it a little bit earlier, where you have folks in the community saying, if you don't get a college degree, then you're not successful. So don't look at the trades, don't look at industry, look at a college degree. And then we inadvertently ended up with a high dropout rate and then a high incarceration rate. So I think we need to go back to the future and then get back into having corporations like the energy industry come into the high schools and then set up co-ops within the high schools and those type of agreements where they're training students in a marketable skill where they can go into those high 5- and 6-figure jobs right out of high school with no debt. And so that then I believe will have a significant impact on the school to prison pipeline. Because if you go back and you look prior to 1960, our dropout rate was a little bit, maybe less than 5%. And then if fast forward to now, we're at, in some schools, up to 50% and better. And if you look at 1979, when I graduated, I think the state of Texas had about 17 state prisons, and then it boosted up to about 137, state prisons. So when you took away that industry component to high school that was given in high school, that helped to boost the dropout rate and then boost the crime rate and then boost incarceration rate. So back to your question about soft skills. Soft skills, along with the hard skills that's necessary to obtain a job, the soft skills help them keep a job. Job retention is, in reentry, we've always seen that job retention is also an issue. That means, you got to get up on time, you got to go to work, and there's a certain decor that you have to have when you go to work, and you have to do it consistently. And so we saw that with our parents. They get up and go to work, for 20 years, for 30 years and retire. And so those sorts of things have to be trained as well to the incarcerated population, because basically when you go into an incarcerated environment, those individuals wake up at a certain time, but they don't necessarily is not to go to a job. Some of them go to a job, some of them don't. But the soft skills that are necessary. How do you treat your supervisor? How do you do carry out the mission of your job? And then how do you perform job performance? Those sort of soft skills have to be trained, and some folks call them life skills. Life skills management training programs. And I think they teach a lot of those inside of the incarcerated environment, but coupled with the hard skills, and then the relationship between the company and the projected employee helps to bridge that gap from those folks who are incarcerated, who are coming out, going right into jobs. And also internships, when you talk about the high school, the secondary education level, internships help to create that relationship between the student and the employers, so the employers feel comfortable that they're getting a valued employee once that student graduates from high school. Real quickly, I love to tell my story about my good buddy David. He loved drafting and metal shop, and at that time Hughes Tools had a co-op agreement with my high school. And so when they took drafting, they were taught how to design drill bits. And when they took metal shop, they were taught how to read the design and also make the drill bits. So when David graduated, he went straight into Hughes Tools. And I went to college to play basketball. When I came home on my break, David had purchased his first house. That's when I realized I had made the wrong decision. So with that being said, the soft skills can be very, very valuable, both at the high school level and both inside of prisons, where we're doing intervention inside of prisons and prevention at the high school level.
It reminds me of the joke of the college professor who starts his semester visiting with his faculty. He says, you be very good to the A and B students because they'll be your fellow professors and your fellow educators in years ahead. But you be darn good to those C and D students because they'll be donating the buildings back. One example, let me give you that I think you'd be interested in and there's all these experiments we need to be looking at. Odessa Community College, they run 5-day-a-week day courses, 5-day-a-week night courses, weekend courses, 3 different curricula. They graduate their Odessa Community College and high school work together. A student gets their community college degree 2 weeks before they get their high school diploma. Mm-hmm. Now that's what you call making efficient that use and different experiments that are out there.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, Wayne, before we open it up to the audience. So how do we do it, right? So from your position, Brian Collier's here from TDCJ, right? There's people, from every walk of life, either here in person or on the live stream. So what do you need from your position to create those labor pathways to the energy industry in Texas?
I need the industry to participate in the education process. I need our legislators to realize that energy is a legitimate education place and educate parents to the facts that oil and gas is very respectable, has those jobs available. Understand it's the type of skills that are even more needing of education when we come back from this downturn, because we've hired artificial intelligence companies to develop new techniques. There's going to be technological developments for workers. So not only are we going to need 50,000 new workers, but they're going to be more highly skilled than before because of what's being invented to make more efficient the production of oil and gas in Texas. So, but a lot of these energy companies are sitting back, like I say, trying to do what they can for their own businesses, but they are not participating in the public relations atmosphere. They're not telling the true story to counter some of these false premises that have been presented that oil and gas is destroying the atmosphere. Catherine Hartnett-White from here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation has a great book called Fueling Freedom. And in that, she just quickly says that you go back to 1900 Texas and today. 1900 Texas, you had average lifespan of 45. Today it's 75. Go back to 1900 Texas, you had children in every community would die in every family under 5 years of age, almost in the state. Now it's a horrific thing for an individual under 25 years to pass away in our communities. The 3 largest environmental causes of death back in 1900 were starvation, when they couldn't raise the crops, freezing to death because they couldn't have enough firewood, and then hurricanes, 1900 or whatever it was in Galveston, 12,000 people in one day. Today, you wind up with, we don't have starvation problem, we have an obesity problem. We no longer freeze to death, we grind because the thermostats a degree or two off on. In hurricanes, every life's valuable, but we get in the car, listen to the news, and drive off away from the hurricanes. And so what's the difference in those 1900 Texas Day? Kathleen Hartnett-White says very clearly, it's oil, gas, and coal that have contributed that. And which world would you rather live in?
Thank you. So why don't we open up to the audience for questions, comments, thoughts?
Well, I had a small conversation before you guys started, and the term sustainability came up. And as I think about the reentry, the concept of building wealth for those coming out of prison so that way they can be self-sustainable, IRAs, 401ks, retirement, in that short span they probably have, and how you provide that right now in energy, and how is that sustainable for the future? So those who are retiring and their benefits, those coming into the industry out of prison or from the market, do they have the same assurances of self-sustainability? And do the corporations have the same assurances of sustainability, knowing that the market's changing?
Who'd like to field that?
Well, I'll jump in on some of that because Fifth Third, we have a broad focus on sustainability. We produced our first, forgive me, ESG report most recently. And have a large growing alternative energy financing program, as well as a very big commitment to the state of Texas and its energy industry. But we also, in terms of individual sustainability and family, some of that is education. And so we provide financial education services through nonprofits and directly, because that's also part of it. So it really requires, if we're truly getting to the point with healthy, sustainable communities, it requires hitting on so many aspects of this. And part of that is the financial community's responsibility, for sure.
Can I add that the American dream is going to be that gamble? I'm sorry. I was told a long time ago, I was working at a bank, and I was told, what do you want to do in life? What's the highest you ever want to get in life and the most you ever want to earn in life? And I looked and said, it'll be who's making the most money in that bank that you're working at. That's as much money as you will ever make working where you are. So that's why America's different with a free market capitalist. I've got a dream. I can go as far as I dream and want to. That's the opportunity. But is there a guarantee? No, sir. It's more of a risk. Get out there on your own, risk it. But that's called the American dream, the opportunity to take your own risks. And I think that's something we need to recapture that we have in America like nowhere else.
You know, and I think with respect to returning citizens, Pastor Loud and I talk about this, dream is synonymous with hope, right? And hope's what gets you through. If there's a hope of a person in prison actually being able to have a sustainable living wage job, a career, right? That's going to change the dynamic in ways that other jobs simply can't. And I think Texas, Louisiana, other places are really poised for this.
John, I just want to say right here, Wayne said something a moment ago, and he mentioned, public relations and being able to do a better job at public relations, particularly in getting energy back into education. You see, the example I gave about Hughes Tools was a part of energy that was in our education system. And so basically, they were teaching students how to do it the Hughes Tools way in the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. So how do we get back to that part, bring that back up to the future? And I think that's going to be the challenge of not just the energy industry, but also, of government, because government has, and our leaders can go out and be mouthpieces for these types of programs and these types of partnerships. And without those partnerships, it makes it extremely challenging for us to close that gap and save a lot of the people who we're talking about, the 1 out of 3 Black men who have a record or who falls in that gap. How do we close that gap? We close that gap with partnerships, with public-private, government plus the private industry working together, getting that down into the education system. And that is a huge challenge for us right now.
May I commend Jason Isaac with the Texas Public Policy Foundation?
Of course.
Jason's a former legislator, and while he was in the legislature, he passed a approved curricula in energy for the state of Texas. Okay, now the thing, Jason, I'm working with him and others are working with him, American Petroleum Institute and others, to try to get that implemented in our public school system, the true science of petroleum. And there's a hard job in that because now that it's an approved curricula, it's available to every school in the state of Texas. It's only approved by the local administration or the local curriculum director, so you have to go one at a time to each school and sell it. But that is where we're talking about, of educating our kids of the truths, the whole truth.
And this isn't just energy, and it's also another industry very important to Texas, manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And manufacturing is also challenged. We were formed as a bank in the Midwest in the 1850s. And so we have deep roots in manufacturing economy. And we've, for the last couple of years, had manufacturers going into the high schools to say, we have great careers waiting for you and great tracks. Mm-hmm. And the resistance comes from the parents and sometimes from the school systems. And
perception.
Yeah, it's a perception.
It's
That's
that
where
perception.
I think,
so we got to strengthen that our public relations on that and overcome that perception. One of the things is I grew up in a community back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, all Black community. But the community I grew up in were African American veterans. They were veterans. They had a veterans program there, and so if you were a veteran, you were able to move into that community fairly easily. And so my parents and other folks, so just about everybody out there were vets, and they worked in those manufacturing companies, and those companies then went out and recruited them. And so it's like, and then word of mouth, because word of mouth travels like water. And so if we run the right public relations, to your point, the right public relations campaigns out there about what's available, letting people know what's available and implementing the bills that you guys are talking about in the curriculums, those things will help us to move the needle north, I believe.
Let me mention real quick, we were visiting earlier, all you've heard so far of what suggestions that we have for money, always been, well, government grants through this department, through this government grant department. There are billions available legitimately in government programs available for education, for all kinds of programs. But what is not, I think, been followed through with are opportunity zones, which you hear a lot about and talk on the media, but there are so few that know actually how to implement that. There are trillions available in capital gains dollars to investment in education, investment in businesses, and others that are available to us. And I've been commissioned on the Railroad Commission of Texas for 4 years now. I've been trying to create the education program, school program, and I have just this week got hold of 2 attorneys that understand opportunity zone enough for doing things in rural America where there are tons, and your particular program from prisons. We've got trillions of dollars available, and that should be investigated, opportunity zones.
Actually, if I could just, forgive me, John, I'm very excited about the future because in a time when we have very few areas of bipartisan agreement, we have 2 clear ones. One, better opportunities for people with a criminal record, and number 2, bringing more manufacturing jobs back to the United States. And I think that will be a pathway to taking advantage of opportunity zones. It makes sense. It's great avenues of employment for people with records. It is coming. We lost 5 million jobs in this country in a 10 or 15 year span. We didn't lose them because technology did away with them. At the same time, same technologies are worldwide. The globe grew 35 million manufacturing jobs. We lost them to the economics of trade. Those economics have shifted. Some of those jobs are coming back to the United States, and some will come and be avenues of employment for people with records.
Gentlemen, thank you. We are at time. I think, one of the biggest takeaways here on the education piece is I think we should talk more about educating and upskilling inside the prison system, right? Mm-hmm. That seems like a very right place to start that's germane to this panel, or to collaterally work with the other things we're talking about, the general education of the state and the nation on this important topic. I want to thank you all for being here, for being with us. And I think we're going to play another video or short break for everybody, then video. And then our final panel, which will have a great group of folks in the direct services industry, including Director Collier. Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
Did you bring a card with you?